This is the Rethink Podcast, where we talk to people who challenge the status quo and who are reshaping, reigniting, and rethinking the economy through health innovation. Please welcome your host, Sanj Sing.
Yeah, good day. Welcome to Rethink Podcast. So for those that are joining for the first time, this is a series of the Office of Health Innovation and Economic Development, we refer to as OHI. We're here, talk to individuals who are rethinking how we can do things. Entrepreneurs, researchers, everyday people on the street who are challenging the status quo and kind of reshaping and reigniting the economy through health innovation. And today I have the pleasure of having Catalina Vasquez here, Chief Operating Officer of Nanostics out of Alberta, Edmonton, joining us today, and is going to talk to us about an exciting test that they developed called ClarityDX to advance early detection of prostate cancer, and specifically those that are clinically relevant to address some of the challenges that prostate cancer screening has happened. But more importantly, Catalina, I'm really happy to have you here. And I have one question to ask you before you make your introduction to yourself. As you know, we've known each other for some time. I run a women's health company. So every time I'm in a women's health forum, I'm usually the double minority. What is a male doing on a women's health forum? Now, prostate cancer is a men's health company. So what is a woman as a chief operating officer? How the heck did you get involved with prostate cancer and Nanostics? But having said that, I'd like to get you to introduce yourself and kind of tell that story.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this today. I'm very happy to be here. So I think it was by fluke. It's actually a funny story. When we immigrated, my husband, my son, and I, when we immigrated to Canada 17 years ago, we did not speak English. So the first thing we had to do is to go to school to learn English. So when I finished all the program, I started immigrated from Colombia. Arrived to London, Ontario, stayed there for 6.5 years. The first year and a half was learning the language. So when I finished the English program, I took a biology course to learn the pronunciation of all the science language type of thing, right? And it turns out that the teacher that led that course also managed this program where she will connect professionals from other countries with labs or institutions or companies in their field. So then they have a practicum and then they get exposed to the work place. My background is in microbiology and medical laboratory science. So I asked her to place me in a microbiology lab. And she came to me very happy, said, "We found you the best possible lab. We found you the best possible principal investigator is Dr. John Lewis. He does prostate cancer research." So
this is in London, in Western Ontario?
London, Ontario, yes, at Western.
Wow, okay.
So I was like, in my head, I'm like, what? Wait a second. I said microbiology. Prostate cancer is not remotely close to microbiology. But obviously, beggars cannot be choosers. And so I said, okay, listen, I'll take whatever you give me. I'll start doing this practicum. It's 1.5 months only in prostate cancer, and I'll excel at it. And then I'll come back to you and ask you to do something in microbiology. That's all in my head while they're very excited presenting me with the opportunity. So obviously I took it. That's how I met Dr. John Lewis. My career focus was to become a laboratory scientist, clinical laboratory scientist in Canada too. So I was going through the process of getting certified and accredited to work in that field. That is because my passion has always been working with patients and help improve the lives of patients. So I was missing that clinical component. So when I started the practicum with John, it was only 1.5 months. He gave me a project. He actually gave me a master's project. I did not know any of this. And he also did not want me to work in the lab. He wanted me to create a database. But then I negotiated with him, managed to get into the lab, to get this project. 1.5 months went by super, super quickly. I asked him to let me stay as a volunteer to finish the project. And he said, no, I'll hire you. He hired me as a lab tech with the condition that I applied for grad student studies. So I did apply for grad studies, going into my master's, and then finished the project. So at the time, John was the chair in translational prostate cancer research at Western. And so I finished my master's. John got recruited by the University of Alberta to lead this research program. And so I stayed in London, managed investigator-initiated clinical trials in oncology for about 1.5 years, took some courses, got certain certificates. And then at the time, John was leading an executive director to lead that initiative that was just being born in Alberta. So he brought me to Alberta. So my family and I decided to move to Alberta to lead that program.
So there is a practicum, 1.5 months.
Yes.
Offered to do a volunteer.
Yes.
You must have established a very good relationship and did good work. And then the opportunity to cut. You can't script that. So that's a great story. So this Alberta Prostate Research Center
yes.
you took over.
Yes.
So talk about that and how it led to Nanostics. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So the Alberta Prostate Cancer Research Initiative, the short form is APCARI. It is born due to the vision of two great men. One is Mr. Frank Sejonki and the other one is Dr. John Lewis. So Mr. Frank Sejonki was diagnosed. Yes, go ahead.
No, it's just to spell the name for us and for Frank. Frank, is it?
Yes, Frank Sejonki, Frank.
Yeah.
Sojonki.
Yeah, just in case people want to look it up, who they are and Google them and to see what he's accomplished. So
yes, absolutely. Yeah. So Mr. Frank Sejonki, he was a Edmontonian, successful entrepreneur. He did living in Vancouver for some years. He was diagnosed and treated for prostate cancer there. And he became familiar with the Prostate Cancer Center in Vancouver, which is a massive center. They have their own building. They develop their own drugs. They have their own clinical trials to validate their drugs, making a lot of progress in multiple sites related to prostate cancer. So that's what he was used to. Then he returned to Edmonton and unfortunately was found to have metastatic prostate cancer. So his cancer did not get cured. It metastasized at some point, and he started a conversation with his medical oncologist, and he was surprised to know that there was no prostate cancer research program in Alberta. And he did not believe that, considering that Alberta had the financial resources to create something similar to what they had in Vancouver. And the oncologist mentioned that bringing a chair in prostate cancer research is a significant endeavor. It costs a lot of money. It needs a lot of resources. And he decided to support that. So he created a group called the Bird Dogs and partnered with the Alberta Cancer Foundation, raised all the money that was necessary for.
And what was that? And what was that amount? I was curious.
It was tens of millions of dollars.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
And
so,
Bird Dog, and where does the Bird Dog come from? Was he a hunter or?
Yeah. He did have some bird dogs, and he actually also supported a foundation for bird dogs. And his strategy was actually quite clever. He was quite an individual, very, very strong. And so he created this group, had his friends go identify potential philanthropists that will join his cause, and then just point to them, and then he will go and he will just and then he will get the money, and he was very successful at that.
The stories that you're telling here is it's very important for people and the listeners, and even also government officials who we live in a public healthcare system. There is a lot of private healthcare. Your orthodontists, dentists, physiotherapists, chiropractors. So it's not all publicly funded, but let's say hospitals and doctors, right? Those are the main things, right? And policymakers sometimes lose sight of companies, or they view companies as just profiteers.
Right.
But when you take that the corporate shell off, and you dig into the the genesis of how did this company come about. It just didn't appear one day saying, you know what, we're going to develop a test and we're going to make a lot of money. There was passion. There was a patient in this case, and this is a story that is I hear a lot is that somebody was impacted, and then had luckily the resources and the desire and the passion to do something, and then they teamed up with some brilliant people in science to make it happen to get there. Now this is you're looking back at 2008, 9. Today is 2024. Right. So it doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
Right. So there is a lot of passion and talent that goes into it. And it's important for those people out there to listen to that, because, when they just view your test as a test and they just look at the number saying, oh, it's worth $300. How are we going to pay for this? I think putting the context of how did we get here is critical to that, because I think a lot of times we lose sight, and I'm talking to policymakers. They lose sight. They just look at it at pure numbers. I remember when I was teaching an MBA class, Catalina, I gave my final exam as a case study, and the case study from the decision was, as a venture capitalist, would you fund this company? And 98% of the time, which is the right decision if you look at just financials, they shouldn't have been funded. But the way that the company did succeed was they put a face onto the disease. The disease is not the disease. There's a face, there's a human, there's a family that's attached to it. And there's a ripple effect. And by the way, when I revealed the company's name, it was called Genzyme. Right. So which got bought by Roche for $20 billion. Right. But back in the 80s, and I met the co-founder of Genzyme, and he told the story of how he got the company funded because nobody wanted to fund his company. All right. So it's really important to have that story that we're trying to tell on this podcast, especially to those decision makers when they're looking at approving tests and funding it. What goes behind it. So yeah, so the bird dog and the pointing to gathering the capital, I mean, this is all on their own dime that they're doing this. Right. This is not government money. This is just people stepping up and saying, hey, I like your vision. I like the mission. Whatever the networks were, we're going to support it. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So Francis Junkie firmly believed that early diagnosis of prostate cancer, screening and early diagnosis could save the lives of many, many men. So they wouldn't develop metastatic disease because the prostate cancer, when detected early, is highly, highly curable, highly treatable, right? So he wanted to
that's true, but that's true for almost, I mean, we're in the ovarian cancer, right? And we're developing a similar test for ovarian cancer for stage 1 and 2. The survival rates are, 90% if you get it in stage 1, as opposed to stage 3 or 4, which is, the silent killers, they call it, right? So, and it's important that we take the needle and move it towards early detection, which technically I think saves the system a lot more money. You take what do you call it, the chronic treatment and also the productivity side, right? Too, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yep. Yeah. So and he was very clear. That's why I'm telling you, like the power of a vision. He said, we need early diagnosis, but I don't want to bring a chair that will just do the research, find something, publish a paper, and go to the next thing. We need a chair that is actually visionary enough to bring this to the clinic. I want this to go to patients. And that's how they found John, because John not only is very clever scientifically, but he also has been a serial entrepreneur since he was a teenager. So he knows the power of bringing something to the clinic, actually make it available to patients. So they brought John as the chair of the program. I started as the program director. And fast forward, we ended up developing this test called ClarityDX Prostate. So it's a very accurate test, that can predict the presence of clinically significant prostate cancer for early diagnosis. And I'll tell you in a second why that is important. But just going back, we went to the philanthropists, we went to the bird dogs and told them, listen, we got it. We developed the test. Here it is. What do we do?
And by the way, and how long did that take to develop, just so people can understand?
Took us about 7 to 10 years to develop.
Yeah.
Yes. So we went to them. We were super excited.
Develop and validate as well, right?
And the initial validate. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And so we went to them. They were super excited, and they said, you must launch a company, and you must finish the validation process for this test to make it available to patients.
Not you should. We must.
This is important. Why we brought you here. This is why we paid for your program. So now launch the company and we'll fund you, or we'll give you the seed funds for you to run the large clinical trial that is needed to validate it. So that's how Nanostics was born. The Alberta Cancer Foundation, who partnered with them to match every dollar they raised, they were adamant that we needed to launch the company. So we created a business plan, we launched the company, got the funding, and then started the validation project. And so we're happy to tell you that the test is fully validated. We ended up getting data from Alberta, Johns Hopkins, UCLA, and Tom Mayer University in Prague. So over close to 3,500 patients, and the test is highly accurate to predict if a patient needs a biopsy or not.
Yeah, so we're gonna dive into that, but I think there's an important story here about the business side of this. So, for OHI, the Office of Health Innovation, one of the things that we've always wanted to do was create collisions amongst the business community, the research community, the clinical community, and the service community, right? And what you've been able to, at least it sounds like Nanostics did, is to do that. You had all of the stakeholders at the table, primarily driven by the bird dogs in terms of their passion and vision and funding. But what could you maybe speak to what role the university and the Alberta government, if any, during this early formation stage and the Alberta Prostate Research Center initiative, right? Had, how were those conversations happening that led to them being involved in that? Because I think that's also good to understand for, academic institutions and policymakers in the government, that they do play a role, that this is a team effort, right?
Definitely. Yeah. So the Alberta Prostate Cancer Research Initiative is embedded within the University of Alberta. So at the very beginning, even before it was a thing, the Alberta Cancer Foundation actually supported a series of ideation meetings, if you will, and it was truly multidisciplinary. So they brought the heads of pathology, radiology, urologists, oncologists, clinical trialists, scientists. Any scientist in the province who would have anything, any biomarker or anything that could support the creation of these new tests were part of the process. And through those ideation steps, what happened is the first goals of what a carry will look like, what the milestones were, those were created. And then that's when I took over and translated that into an action plan that was our execution map, if you will, for the next 5 years. And so it was great because then we were able to leverage the funding that Francis Junkie, the Bird Dogs, and the Alberta Cancer Foundation provided to bring John to be the chair of the program and to support UpCarry on its initial stages. We were able to leverage funding from other philanthropy agencies like Terry Fox, the Prostate Cancer Foundation, Movember, the University Hospital Foundation, but also through the government. So we have been able to secure grants through Alberta Innovates, and it has had multiple names in the last 10 years, but lately the Alberta Innovates, they funded the initial research program. And once we demonstrated results, we were also able to, once we launched the company, Alberta Innovates continue supporting us through grants that are in partnership with Alberta Health Services or Alberta Health, and at the time down the line to fully validate the test in a clinical setting. So the government has had a role after the initial funding. The university has had a role. Other foundations have a role. Then all the clinicians and researchers also, because they provided their vision. The urologists at all stages of the process were informing what they wanted to have in the clinic. What was the accuracy that they needed? What was the turnaround time? Like, what would be obstacles for them that they would like us to address before they occur, so then the test can fit seamlessly into the standard of care.
Yeah, the hardest thing to do sometimes is to have clinicians change their habits. So having them involved in the design process was a smart thing to do. Where was the health authority, Alberta Health? Like I would say, like in Saskatchewan, we have the Saskatchewan Health Authority, which is in the Ministry of Health. I think in Alberta, it's called Alberta Health Services, AHS, right?
So the health authority is Alberta Health, and then Alberta Health Services is the entity that provides the services to Alberta Health.
Yeah. So this was, sounds like there was a lot of people at the table, but also a lot of people were engaged throughout the process to get here, right? So now you've got, so let's dive into the specific nature, and we're not going to get deep into the science, but I think it's important. Now, you talked about early detection, and just maybe give a high level of what the current guideline is from the CUA, the Canadian Urologic Association, on on screening for prostate cancer, and then we're going to get into some of the challenges of that, and then how this test is positioned within that, because I think the idea from what I read about the ClarityDX, it adds a lot of value in two of the biggest challenges that the current guidelines have been struggling with, especially around what everybody knows is the PSA. I bet you 8-10 out of people wouldn't know what it stands for, but I'm sure you'll tell the audience. But the PSA biomarkers, or the PSA tests that they do, there are certain things there. So this test is kind of designed, and I'm just setting the context and frame for you, to address that unmet need, right? That has come from two particular challenges, right, with the PSA. And one thing I'll say this to the audience too is that the most dangerous thing in science, right, is to say, well, this is the way it's been done. So we have to challenge that status quo and to say, okay, how can we make this better? Especially if you have patients in mind, right? That's ultimately what you're trying to do. And at the same time, if you take care of that, you should also have a benefit to the healthcare system, right? So having set that context for you, maybe talk about the PSA guidelines, some of the challenges, and then how your test is positioned in that and the value that it adds.
Absolutely. Yes. So I'm going to arbitrarily change the order of your question.
No, you this is your company, and you do what you need to do.
Yeah. So PSA screening. So PSA stands for prostate specific antigen. So it is a simple blood test. It's cheap, easy, done globally. It was the PSA test was discovered decades and decades ago to measure what patients were cured after surgery for prostate cancer. And it's amazing. Still, up until today, it's a great test for that, because prostate-specific antigen is a protein that is produced by the prostate almost exclusively, right? So if you take the prostate out through surgery and there is no cancer growing anywhere in the city, or in the body, then there is no PSA. PSA levels are zero, are undetectable, right? So it's amazing. But then the discoverers of the protein said, oh, why don't we use it to detect prostate cancer? So then they started using it as a screening test. Simple blood test, guidelines were created. So basically when men reach certain age, typically over 50, or if they have family history of prostate cancer, or if they have other elevated risk factors like being African American or working with certain chemicals, or if they have symptoms, then they start being tested with the prostate specific antigen PSA. So the issue with PSA is that it is very good at detecting patients that have prostate cancer, but is really bad at detecting patients that do not have prostate cancer. And what this means is if a man has an elevated PSA testing, up to 85% of the cases, that man does not have prostate cancer. But because they have an elevated PSA, then doctors feel that they need to act on it. And historically, what has happened is for those elevated PSAs, men are then sent to have a prostate biopsy. The prostate biopsy is a procedure where this device is inserted into the rectum of the man. And
I think you could for most men, you could just probably stop there and say, yeah, it's uncomfortable.
It is
right?
very uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
And not only that, but also
it's costly.
Yes, It is costly, but also because of the way you access the prostate, it comes with a high risk of infection. So men can have an infection after the prostate, and sometimes that infection can become a sepsis, which is when the infection reaches the blood and the organs, and men can die from that. So death rate from a prostate biopsy is from 2 to 4%. In fact, in our clinical trials, we have had men who have died from sepsis for the families to discover later that the patient did not have prostate cancer. They didn't need the biopsy.
So what I'm hearing is it sounds like what the ideal situation would be is to only do biopsies ultimately on patients who have, as you referred to earlier, clinically significant or clinically relevant prostate cancer, right?
That's right.
That's what we're just trying to narrow that group down.
Right.
Of who we're going to do actual surgery. This is actually very similar to our endometriosis approach. So we're developing a blood test to diagnose endometriosis, because right now the only way you can detect endometriosis through laparoscopic surgery. So with biopsy and pathology, very similar, right?
Mm-hmm.
and of course all the complications of that surgery brings, right? General anesthesia and everything else, right? So this is so carry on. This is very interesting, and the parallels are coincidental, but not surprising.
Yes. So I just told you the whole story. So what happened is PSA started being used a lot. So a lot of men ended up having these unnecessary biopsies, which means in a clinical term we call it morbidity. So PSA led to a lot of morbidity, which is all these adverse effects that happen or complications that happen post-biopsy for a lot of men who did not need the biopsy. So what happened is globally, the task forces for early detection of prostate cancer started meeting and said, oh no, PSA is causing more harm than good. So they all advised against screening for prostate cancer using PSA. So what happened is...
Okay, so hang on a second, just to get this clear. So you went from a guideline that says, hey, let's do PSA.
Yes.
And then you pissed off a lot of men.
Yes.
From saying, hey, you shoved that thing and now you didn't need to do that. And now I got all these residual effects. Right. So the guidelines now switch back to saying, we don't recommend this for the vast majority, but I'm sensing that you're going to saying, well, we only recommend it for a very specific group. Or am I wrong? Okay.
That's right. So what happened is this is like a pendulum, right? So we went to screening everyone, and then it swung and went to no screening. But then what they started finding is that after they recommended again PSA screening, then a lot of men, way more men, started being diagnosed with late stage prostate cancer.
Of course.
That was incurable, right? So then a lot of the task forces and the country guidelines, urology guidelines, went to a middle point where they're saying, well, actually, you know what? Let's screen with PSA, but have the conversation with your patient about the potential side effects of a biopsy or screening. Unfortunately, so the Canadian Urological Association guidelines now recommend screening with PSA. The US guidelines, the European guidelines recommend using PSA. Unfortunately, the PSA screening doesn't happen at the urology clinic in Canada, it happens at the GP clinic and at the family physician clinic. And so the task force recommendations are against screening for prostate cancer in Canada. Despite all the task force in the world being updated, despite all the urology guidelines being updated, the Canadian task force up until today still advises against PSA screening.
So let's talk about the task force. Who makes up this task force?
It is a group of actually volunteers that work to create the recommendation or guidelines for all screening, the screening of all diseases that have screening problems.
But not they're not urologists. They're
not
just
urologists. They do not accept urologists because they feel that there is a conflict of interest. That is biased towards
okay.
screening.
So all right. So here's I mean, this may sound a bit critical of that. If I have a plumbing problem, I call a plumber. I like his bias. I'm not going to call a electrician to solve a plumbing issue.
Right.
They won't know what the heck is happening. I mean, in a way, I understand the premise. I think in healthcare, where you need the specificity of the specialty, because that's what they do. That's the subject matter expert.
Right.
That may have to be revisited. I'm not sure, what you and I can do about it here, but I think this is a conversation, another one on this Canadian task force, because if the guidelines, this would be. I have a friend who sits on the electrical code committees, that keeps us safe, right? In bathrooms with ground fault protection and things like that. When you're in the boat in the harbor, water is a great way to get electrocuted. I can't imagine that they put out guidelines for safety and electrical, and then another independent task force says, well, no, we don't really accept those guidelines because we don't think it's sorry, makes no sense to me. But anyway, carry on. It's beyond the scope of this conversation, but it seems a bit in healthcare and things where safety and health is important, like an electrical.
Yes. And I think
I'm bewildered.
I agree, and I think that can be addressed by bringing. So there is specialists with different flavors and with different agendas, if you will. But I'm absolutely sure you can find urologists that are completely the opposite of self-serving, who will want to help guide these guidelines. But the good news is they're working towards updating the guidelines, and they're suggesting that we may expect an update by 2026. So we're looking forward to hearing what they have to recommend at that point. So what is happening now is we understand prostate cancer screening using PSA can cause harm based on the low specificity of PSA. But the good news is there are what we call
just for the audience, sorry, Catalina, because I know you're in a role, but yes. I think for some of the audience, just to make sure that so when you refer to specificity, I think that you're referring to earlier saying, 85% of people that are screened, false positives, they don't have it. So you want to make sure increase the accuracy of, if I can use that word, that cancer is cancer.
Right. Exactly.
It's not something else, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And so there are tools available right now to help improve that accuracy of PSA. So one of it is MRI. MRI have been used semi-recently across Canada. So what is happening is doctors, instead of ordering a biopsy right away after an elevated PSA, what they do is they order an MRI, and then based on the results of the MRI, they decide if the biopsy is done or not. And,
so I'm gonna stop you there again. So I'm gonna address the challenge of that.
Right.
What's the wait list? What's the waiting time for getting?
Right. So it is a great tool. It is highly accurate and provides a lot of information about the potential location of the tumor, which informs where they should take the biopsy from. But in certain jurisdictions, patients will have to wait for up to 11 to 12 months to get an MRI done. So we have a shortage of instruments to run the MRI. And to understand the problem is MRIs are used for many, many diseases, many problems, some which are acute, and the MRI is needed to save a life at that very moment, whereas prostate cancer potentially could wait a little bit longer. So some of these patients will have to wait for up to 11 to 12 months to know if they need a biopsy or not.
So let me share with you a story that's very personal to us. As recent as last month, one of our shareholders died from prostate cancer.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear.
So, and here's the delay time. So every 2 years, he went in and got his physicals and got his PSAs done, just as to make sure the barometer there. Because anytime tests are always more meaningful in trending, right? Not just a single type of thing. So during the pandemic, they weren't doing testing. So he missed it for 4 years. So he went back a year and a half ago, and his PSA levels were high. And it came back that he had stage 4. So when you talk about MRIs and wait times, and then it mets to the bone, and then he recently passed 50, early 50s, right? Left 2 kids. He was a professional, right? Was one of our shareholders, helped to fund our company, and he leaves behind his family, his practice, and he's in the healthcare field. So time waiting, and MRIs aren't necessarily inexpensive either. Right? They're pretty expensive tests, right? So anyway, carry on. So it's this, I mean, it's a timely interview with you based on what happened, right? So
yeah, it's very unfortunate. But sadly, that's the story we're hearing more and more because of the lack of ordering PSA to screen for prostate cancer. So imagine, just picture this side. Cancer has a really bad connotation. Once you're told you may have cancer, immediately you go to the worst case scenario, right? So you think death, you think like lengthy chemotherapy treatment. It is awful. So we're talking to these men, we're telling them, you may have prostate cancer, you may need a biopsy, but you need to have an MRI first. And the earliest we can get you an MRI is in 8 months, 6 months, even 4 months. Imagine like 4 months that the patients are not sleeping. The quality of life decreases dramatically because in their head, I may have prostate cancer, I may have prostate cancer, I may have prostate cancer. So that is where our test comes into place. Here's another
pathway though, right?
Yes.
If that's me, right, and also our shareholder probably too, if they have the dollars, they're just going to go to the States or somewhere to a private clinic to pay for it themselves. They're not going to wait. But that is a small percentage of the people who can afford to go and spend, $1,200 or whatever it is dollars on an MRI, right? Rather than wait, which tells you that they're spending dollars outside of your province. Or I know in Saskatchewan you can pay for an MRI. And then I think you get one for someone. It's like a 2-for-1 in Saskatchewan, where then another one in the public system can get done right away. So yeah, but anyway, it's cumbersome. There's like you said, there's a quality of life, anxiety, not just for the person, but all their family members, right? They're going, what's happening, and right, they want some answers, right? Yeah,
that's right. So now that we have this test that was developed through the vision of Frank Sejonki, who wanted to impact patients for early diagnosis. So now we come full circle. And now what we're doing is we are going to the task force, we're going to the guidelines, we're going to family doctors, we're going to urologists and telling them, listen, there is a different way. We understand PSA is not very accurate at predicting the men that do not have prostate cancer, but now we have this test. And what the test does is just that, tell what men are at very low risk of having prostate cancer, so then they don't need a biopsy. So the way we're thinking that it could be implemented is family physicians order the PSA openly to all men that are eligible to have it. So stop that recommendation to not screen for prostate cancer. Start doing PSA on all men 50 and over, or earlier if they have a high risk of potentially having prostate cancer. And then if the PSA is elevated, then you have this other test. This test will tell you the PSA, I think, was wrong. This patient actually had very low risk of having prostate cancer. So then the family doctor can have then a more informed conversation with the patient to see if they need to be sent to urology. If the decision is to not send the patient to urology, then they continue following up with PSA in case there is an increased value that will tell you that they probably need to go to urology.
Right.
And then at the urology level, for example, in certain jurisdictions in Canada, we have wait lists of several hundred patients waiting to see a urologist. So those patients can also benefit from the test, because then if we run the test and it says that the patient has high risk of having clinically significant prostate cancer, then the urologist can potentially expedite that consult and see that patient, maybe go straight to the biopsy without the MRI, or maybe expedite the MRI. Whereas the ones that are at very low risk can have that peace of mind to know that they can go to family doctors and continue the follow-up.
So here's another challenge, right? In the primary health system, right? We're all familiar with the family doc situation. Hundreds of thousands in Saskatchewan have no family physician. I think it's around it's over 300. It's over 300,000. Mm-hmm. And then to be able to see one, right? But in Saskatchewan as well, they've been expanding the roles of nurse practitioners. So at one of the clinics that I've spoken to you about, there's a nurse practitioner-led clinic. They're also looking to bring in physician assistants next year. Should they have that requisition authority to look at so I guess there's the answer. Yes. Because I think what you're trying to do is avoid the bottlenecks, right? And even for example, my daughter's a physiotherapist in Alberta for Alberta Health Services, looks after long COVID, and one of the things she said is, all of us as physiotherapists, we're all waiting around for a physician, not because they just have a workload and it's a bottleneck, to make the requisition for the next step of care, where we know exactly what needs to be done, but we don't have the requisite authority to request those types of either test or rehab or what have you, right? Mm-hmm. And so, there's the argument for physiotherapists to have expanded scope in whether it's in Alberta, Saskatchewan, because again, they're dealing with the rehab, recovery, treatment of patients, in their fields, right? Whether it's cardiopulmonary or musculoskeletal. So it's, if you want to increase the screening side, you almost have to increase the numbers of doors that patients can walk through to get this type of screening done. Is that what I'm hearing from you? I'm just trying to think about how do we implement, how do we increase the utilization of
absolutely. So in Alberta, nurse practitioners can request the test, even pharmacists. So in Alberta, pharmacists that are allowed to prescribe tests. So that's exactly what we did. We're reaching out to all these groups, to all these specialties, talking about the test, educating them about the path to screen and diagnose prostate cancer. So then they feel they can have a role helping our men.
Yeah. So without getting, I know because of the work that you guys have done in developing this test and the validation that you've done, is very data driven. There's machine learning and algorithms, and which are, everybody's talking about that these days. So you've kind of actually implemented it. And essentially, it's one of those tests that helps to triage those patients that have a potentially very high risk of having cancer, so that they can get the next step if based on the consult with their specialist. So it's really individualized to the patient, right? Their risk factors, their medical history, and taking all of this information into the context and decision making with the patient to say, hey, we believe that the pathway for you specifically, and we're not talking about a general population here, but that one specific patient, is that we should explore a biopsy with you and get the pathology on that. And I think this is where one of the OHI put out a conference called the 4 Ps of Healthcare, right? It was predictive, right? Personalized, participatory, and I'm forgetting now the last P, and preventative. So it's it sounds like Nanostics and the ClarityDX, you're hitting all 4, right? You're hitting the predictive side, you're hitting the personalized side, you're hitting the preventative side, and the participatory side, which is the patient and the doctor participating in their individualized care, right? Would that be a summary of what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now the test is in terms of making it available in Saskatchewan. It's available in Alberta, right? What other provinces has it been being utilized in currently?
Yeah. So we have been very fortunate to find partners also that share our vision. And so Life Labs has agreed to help us collect the samples in BC, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. So basically, the test requisition is available online at nanosticsdx.com. Patients or doctors can download the requisition forms, fill them out, and then the patients can go to any lab, any Life Labs in BC and Ontario, and 2 specific Life Labs in Saskatchewan. The lab collects the samples, sends it to us, and then within less than a week, the requesting doctor or healthcare practitioner should have the results in their inbox.
Yeah, and we'll make sure, as during the when this podcast airs, that those links will appear in the podcast, so that those who are interested in it can find it and go to it and get those things. So, so Life Labs in Saskatchewan already is the collection facility. They send it to you guys for the analysis. And then it's really an online kind of like eHealth, our own health services. People can log on and see the results, and whether it's your physician and or you as your patient, right? Is that the idea?
That's the goal. Currently, what we're doing is we're sending them via mail to the doctors or fax if requested. And but what we're doing now is we're working with the governments we're initiating a conversation to make the test accessible to every man that needs it through coverage through the government, but also integrating it into the healthcare systems and the electronic medical records, so then the doctors can have access to it and show it to the patients in real time.
I had quoted a price earlier today, so I want to make sure that is the right price. You had said $300. So that's talk right about that. So it's who charges it? How do patients pay for it? Like, how is it? Who actually issues the invoice, and where does the payment go? Like, just talk about that.
Yes.
Right.
So the cost of the test is $300, and that includes us rerunning the PSA. And there is another biomarker test called pre-PSA that adds value to the algorithm. So we have our own accredited lab in Alberta, and so we run those tests, include the algorithm on top of it, do the prediction, and then send it back to the doctors. And this is offered as a laboratory developed test. It is important to clarify that we're not Health Canada cleared yet. We're in the process of getting that clearance, but in the country, it is allowed to sell the test as a laboratory developed test once it is validated through an accredited lab, and that's what we're doing. So
Right.
the cost of the test is $300 for provinces outside of Alberta where we have to pay for shipping. So these samples have to be frozen and shipped in what we call dry ice. So we charge an extra price for shipping. It can be up to $200 depending on what FedEx charges us and the cost of dry ice.
So it's
it
a
could
cost
be up
recovery.
to $500. Yes.
Yeah, but but when you so I mean, but talking about that, when you think about it, right? 6, 8, 10, 11 months waiting for an MRI,
right?
Or give up Starbucks coffee for a couple of months. So I think people spend about $150 a month on coffee. It's amazing when you think about it, right? Every time you go and get a coffee, it's $5, $6 plus tip, right? That's like, so, I mean, that's peace of mind, right? I mean, that's what you're essentially what you're selling is, and what people are buying is peace of mind. Is it or is it not? Because there's a lot of anxiety surrounding and interwoven with uncertainty, right? So, I have to, we're kind of coming to the ending here, Catalina, for a time. I think that, the story that you've told from Colombia to London, Ontario, to Edmonton and where you're today, I have to take my hat off to you. Great work, especially for a brown woman who is not from here, who didn't know the language. You've done incredibly well. Kudos to you and your team. Kudos to Frank and John and the rest of the team. I'm sure there's a whole lot of people, but that passion has to come from someone. Everything in life is sometimes the vision of one, and then the burden is lessened by the hands of many, right? And to do what you're doing here, what would you like the the policymakers in Saskatchewan who are looking at and evaluating what they reimburse, because approval is not a concern anymore, so it's basically making it widely available. What are some of the kind of takeaways that you would like them to hear that this test brings in terms of value to them, and the kind of the way they make decisions, which is usually on cost benefit, right? Is where they and probably at the margin, right? They're making that decision, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so we already started the conversation in Alberta. We're looking for the right agents to talk at each of the provinces to start talking about reimbursement. We did have a health economic study performed by the Institute of Health Economics, which is an independent group. This was paid by the government. And the study supported the use of the test, even at a way higher price point. And so we decided to go with a lower price point because we wanted to be accessible to all men that could benefit from it. And only in Alberta, the use of ClarityDX Prostate will save the province millions of dollars every year on unnecessary biopsies, potentially unnecessary MRI. Now the MRI has been incorporated into the healthcare system. So we're happy to talk with whomever is interested in discussing the opportunity to bring this to men in Saskatchewan. We're happy to share all the resources we have. So we have a peer-reviewed, published articles. We have the health economic study results and way more data that can be made available to ensure this test is successful.
And are you also looking for, clinicians or clinics like beta sites or test sites or collection, basically getting a few of the clinicians or practices on board to start utilizing it to see that benefit, right?
Yes, yeah. And we already started talking with multiple clinics across Alberta and across Canada. Actually, some of them, we go to the clinics, we talk to all the doctors, we train them on the benefits and the way to use it and to interpret the results. And we have seen an uptake of tests, men having the test done as a result to that. we're also partnering with CDL Labs in Quebec, and they do have private clinics across Canada. We're exploring the possibility of having them also offer the test.
Right. One of the things I'm thinking about too, the value is, Saskatchewan is 669,000 square kilometers of land and just over 1 million people. So, we're talking, majority of those are in Saskatoon and Regina. But there's also, if you look at demographics, and if I'm correct in my assumptions, and you can correct me if I'm not, there's an older population that is in the rural areas. And traveling to tertiary centers for biopsies, especially when we spend 8 months in winter, and the cost and time to do that is also somewhat alleviated by having a blood test done. And, let's just say getting a lot of that front end work done and only sending those who need biopsies to the main centers and not clogging up the wait times and for other things, right? So it's really about efficiency, right? Accuracy and ultimately delivering, better care to individuals, not just healthcare, but life care, I would say, because it's their life that, just what they have to set aside to go get a biopsy, right? May require a lot of logistical planning for a lot of older adults and families to make arrangements. So there's also that benefit too. And, something that the SAS party here, which is the ruling party, which looks like whether they have a majority government or not in the next election or not, they appear to will remain in power. Their whole base is in the rural. So if there's any incentive for them to continue holding on to their base, it is their, if there's no other health initiative, there's a political agenda that could also be accomplished with this too. So we hope that it's not the driving force, that they actually do care about people. But look at it, we're an atypical. We are not apolitical. So we don't. And I had a chat with Minister Everett Hindley about a few months ago, and I said to him, "Look at we don't sign on to any political party. We will criticize you, and we will also provide you constructive advice, because that's how we get better. And as long as you guys are open to that, we'll continue to challenge you." So, Catalina, this has been a pleasure. We've known each other for a while, but, literally hearing the story in entirety, because we never get to spend this kind of time together. It's always too fleeting, too many receptions, too many meetings to go to where we go. So it was a pleasure having you. Great work. OHI will do what we can to help support you, and me personally as well in this province to bring this test to Saskatchewan and see where we go from here. Any closing thoughts that you have?
No. First, thank you very much again for the opportunity to talk to you about this long project that is near and dear to our hearts. And just want to share that we were a team. We shared the same vision, the same mission. We're fully aligned with what Francis Jonkin wanted to do. And beyond any commercial interest, what we really, really care is about impacting the lives of our patients and improving the early diagnosis, improving their quality of life, and ensuring that no man dies from prostate cancer due to an untimely diagnosis.
Yeah. On that, thank you again. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.